Welcome to Shark Felt, where I felt that. Last month, I needle felted Kuromi, so of course I have to craft my melody as well, since they're technically rivals, but we all know they're secretly besties. I start creating her head by rolling up my base wool, then poking at it with my two-pronged felting tool. Eventually switching over to my largest tool once her head is shaped correctly to speed up the process. Then I just wrap the head up in more of my base wool to bulk out its size, because as of right now, it's too small. If you're following along and want to needle felt a smaller size My Melody, you can just leave this step out. Now it's just a repetitive process of adding more wool and poking at its shape until the head is the size you want it to be. Once all of the extra wool is tucked into place, we can move on to the body. Getting out a large tuft of base wool, I place it into my felting stencil depicting a circle to get an idea of how I want the bottom of the body to look like, then begin poking at said wool with my two-pronged felting tool. Once it's holding its shape well enough, I take it out of the stencil and place it onto the felting mat. Then I roll it up into more base wool to bulk it out exactly like I did with the head in the previous step. I continue to poke it until it's firm enough to work with easily later. To create the legs, I grab a medium tuft of base wool and poke at it while I'm tightly rolling it up so that they keep their longer, slender form as opposed to the body's shorter stature. Same as with the past steps, I just get into a repetitive pattern of poking and rolling the wool until both of her legs are the proper size and shape in proportion to the body. Now we can start crafting her some hands, starting with the palms, by taking a tiny tuft of white wool and needle felting it into the shape of a flat oval. Once you have two, take an absolutely miniature tuft of white wool to create the thumbs by stabbing it into an olive shape with a small felting needle. Then attach the thumbs to the sides of the palms. Next, we'll make her arms by shaping a small piece of white wool into a cylinder with a medium-sized felting needle. Attach the arm vertically by poking it onto the top of the palm, creating a wrist and connecting the pieces. Then I roll the arm into another tuft of white wool to bulk it out and match her plump little bunny figure. Once I'm sure the arm is big enough, I get out a small tuft of white wool yet again and place it down on top of where the arm and hand connect, then felt the area to smooth down her wrist. With both arms done, we can now color the legs. First, I place a bit of white wool on top of the leg, then gently poke it into the base wool with my two-pronged felting needle to hide its cream color. Now fully colored around the sides, I place another tuft of white wool onto the feet to color them as well. With all of the fluff poked into place, I put more white wool on top of the leg this time, with fluff purposefully sticking out from the sides so that it's easier to attach onto the body later on. Once both legs are complete with their respective extra fluff, we can connect them to said body. Pushing in pin needles to hold them in place, I start poking at the fluffy bits with my two-pronged felting tool to attach the legs to the body as one whole piece. As I'm needle felting where the legs connect, some of the white color gets lost inside the body as a result of attaching them. So I just add more white wool on top and felt it into each side to recolor it and smooth out the connection. Which seems like a hassle, but trust me, it's way easier to color than connect instead of vice versa. Now we'll try to add color to the body with multiple tufts of white wool by just repeating the same process of laying it down and stabbing it in all around the body until completion. Once finished, we'll add them grippers. For her to be serving toes, I take a tuft of white wool and shape them directly on top of her foot with a medium-sized felting needle, making sure to stab in deep grooves between where the foot and leg separate, giving her ankles on each leg. To attach the arms to the body, I push pin needles in through the arms into the body to hold them still, then poke them into the wool of the body, creating shoulders and attaching them firmly. Not worrying too much about neatness, cause they'll be covered at the top. To craft her fluffy tail, I ball up a tuft of white wool and stab at it with a large felting needle all around the ball evenly to keep it a perfect sphere. Eventually switching over to my two-pronged felting needle and adding more wool to the tail because it was too small for my liking. Then I connect it to the body by placing in my pin needles and poke the bits of fluff I left at the end of the tail into the body. Now I'm making the head bigger because it was too small yet again. Once that's dealt with, I push pin needles into the head to use as a guide for where her hood and face meet. Grab my pink wool and start felting it into her head to create her pink bunny hood. Following my guide, I poke tufts of pink wool into the outer part of her head using my two-pronged felting tool to speed up the process quicker than it would have been had I just been using one felting needle. With that out of the way, we can color her face. To accomplish this, I take out the pin needle guide off camera and place a large tuft of white wool onto her face, then begin stabbing it into the cream-colored base wool using the pink edges of her hood as a new guide. I accidentally got a little overzealous with the white wool, so I just snip it off with my small shears and felt the fluffy edges back into the face. To make her blinkers, I pull out my black wool and place a tiny amount of it onto her face and set off delicately poking in the shape of them. One down, and I accidentally made the other eye really big and bulgy, which I snipped away at mostly off camera, so that's why it's flatter and gray like how you see it right now. Anyway, once I've smoothed it down enough, I lay more white wool over my mistake and felt it in so that I can start over with a new piece of black wool and get it right this time. There we go. That looks so much better. Taking out my pastel yellow wool, I put down a little bit of it in the middle of her face and begin stabbing in the shape of her tiny nose. With those last pokes, the nose is now finished and we can make her smile. Grabbing a thin strip of black wool, I put it onto the face and carefully poke in the mouth. Once the middle part of her grin is in place, I cut the ends off of the thin black wool strip with my mini shears, set them away, and clean up the edges. Now that her entire face is complete, we can get to work on the bottom part of her hood. Taking a tuft of pink wool, I place it into the circle shape of a felt stencil already set up on my felting mat and start needle felting the collar of her hood. Once the wool is firming up, I take it out of the stencil and add more pink wool to it to make it more of an oval shape. Now that the wool is an oval, I cut the bottom of it to make the opening of the hood's collar. Then I cut to the left and right at the top of the first slit and finally snip the top of the first cut yet again so that the collar can more easily be attached to the head. Kinda looking like a pink lily pad, I go back in with my two-pronged felting needle and tidy up the edges of the collar's opening. To attach it to the head, I push pin needles through the collar into the head and begin poking the flaps down I made earlier to help me accomplish this with a large felting needle. Looks pretty neat, actually. Well, I was going to join the head and body, but I just now noticed that because of the way my Melody's hood opens up in the front, you'd be able to see the base wool's color on her neck in the finished product. So I needle felt in some white wool on top of the neck to cover that up so it isn't a problem in the future. To create her bunny ears, I place a tuft of base wool onto the felting mat and roll it up. Then I poke at it with my two-pronged felting tool to first craft her upright ear. I continue to stab the wool into shape and then make her floppy ear by using the same shape as the first, but this time I bend it at an angle and then poke where the bend is to finish up her second ear. With both bases of the ears complete, we can start adding color to them by grabbing some pink wool, then positioning it around the tip of the ear and poking it into place. Next, you just keep felting in the pink wool all around the ear if it wants to behave until it's done, leaving a bit of fluff at the base of the ear for easy attachment later on. Finishing up the first ear, we can proceed to the second one, following the same steps as before. Although this one is a tiny bit more difficult because of the odd shape and crook in the ear, which requires a little more finagling than the other one because it's hard to needle felt color into a crevice, but with a little determination, it can be done. To attach the ears to the head, I use my pin needles to hold the piece in place. Then, using the tufts of pink fluff we left at the bottom of the ear, I poke a large felting needle into the head through the tufts first to connect them firmly. Okay, her disembodied head looks kinda scary. Or like a cute keychain? When joining the ears to the head, I guess I didn't leave enough pink fluff at the bottom, because the white seam is still visible, so I just felt more pink wool in around the base of the ears to smooth out the ugly transitions between the ears and head. Awesome, now they look like one coherent object. Last but not least, I begin creating her ear flower by using one of my felt stencil's smaller circles to needle felt the 4 petals found on her flower, one by one using my bright white wool, and 2-pronged felting needle to finish them off. I assemble them together as one piece by pinning them down onto my felting mat and placing a small tuft of white wool into the center, then poking it down into them to bind the petals to one another. Removing the petals from the felting mat, I pin them down under my Melody's ear and place a tiny bit of yellow wool in the middle of them to start making the disc of the flower. Gradually, I poke around the outside of the disc more than I do the center so that it appears more three-dimensional. Finally, we can attach the head to the body by pinning it down, then poking close to the base of her neck to join the 2 parts together. To finish her off, I take out my small wool shears and snip away any stray hairs so that she looks more professional and the pictures turn out prettier in the end. Perfecting a few last snips, she's now fully complete and ready for her glamour shots.